So hello and welcome to this NPTEL course entitled Gender and Literature, where we're looking at Bell Hooks' essay, Understanding Patriarchy. So we have already had one lecture on this essay, and we'll just continue with that text today and in the following lectures to come. So we see how this essay is interesting in the sense that it completely deconstructs this very neat binary between the male perpetrator and the woman victim. So it looks away from the binary, it deconstructs the binary, it does away with the binary of looking at this gender divide between the aggressive perpetrating male and the passive powerless woman. And Hooks makes a very clear argument that we need to move away from this dualistic position and look at the core problem of patriarchy and locate patriarchy as a core problem which affects people of different genders. So it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, you are affected by patriarchy in an adverse way. And this adverse effect of patriarchy is described in medical terms by Hooks, as we have seen already. So she talks about patriarchy being a disease which affects men and women, and it's a pathology which is endemic to our society, etc. And that's how she looks at patriarchy as a problem. So it's a very interesting take on patriarchy. It's a very interesting take on gender inequality, gender trouble, gender problems that Hooks is offering us here. So it's more of a post-structuralist take on patriarchy, right? And she says quite clearly in various sections in the essay, which will come by frequently, and that is the word patriarchy doesn't appear often enough in seminars and polite conversations and debates about gender, etc. So she says people talk about all kinds of things. People talk about gender inequality, gender abuse, male abuse on women, women suffering, women's problems, etc., male alcoholism, but they very seldom locate the core problem, the core cause for all these reasons, for all these phenomena, and that is patriarchy. So patriarchy as a core cause of all the problems is hardly, very seldom identified, articulated, or addressed. And she says one of the first things we should do as feminists, as people who believe in gender equality, is locate patriarchy as a core problem and then seek to address the problem and engage with the problem as best we can. Okay, so one of the complex things about this essay is that it does away with the dualism of male abuser and woman abused. That kind of a binary is done away with. And secondly, it also looks at anecdotal references. So it talks about real lived experiences, not just patriarchy as a textual construct, not just patriarchy as a social construct, but patriarchy as a lived reality. And that's something that Hooks is very keen on. And that connects us to one of the things that I've talked about already when we introduced this course in the first lecture, and that is the combination, the balance, the complex of textuality and experientiality. So there's a danger if we look at everything as a text, as I mentioned earlier. So we also need to take account of the fact that these are very experiential phenomena. Gender is a very experiential phenomena, and if we ignore and avoid and disregard the experientiality of gender, then we're doing a disservice to the whole complexity of gender trouble. And Hooks is someone who's very keen on experientiality as well. So she talks about how patriarchy is constructed, contained, consolidated, and different kinds of ideological apparatus, different kinds of institutional apparatus. But also, and equally importantly, she talks about the experience of patriarchy, the experientiality of patriarchy, and she gives very, very frequent anecdotal evidences from her own life, from her own childhood, from her own male partners in terms of, in order to corroborate the problems that she is trying to describe here. So, and this is the working definition of patriarchy that Hooks has offered already, and we just rehearse this before we move on to the other sections of the essay. And she says quite clearly over here that patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone, deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. So know the terms which are used over here, the phrases psychological terrorism and violence. So the violence and terrorism are not just corporeal and not just body-based, but they also become psychological. They also become forms of indoctrination, forms of fear, structures of fear that are sort of injected into the minds of people who are expected to be conformist to patriarchy, to be believers in patriarchy. So patriarchy is a system which is designed to make men superior to women, to corroborate through different kinds of evidential backing, different kinds of factual backing, that men are superior to women in terms of their physical, intellectual, psychological, emotional endowments, and so it's the job of the men to rule, to control, to take the lead, and it's the job of the woman to obey. That's a very blunt definition of patriarchy, but that's a working definition of patriarchy which we find operative in different disguises and different degrees of sophistication in different institutions that we come by. The first institution being family, and family becomes a very important unit in this essay, which is studied and revisited extensively by Hooks. So she gives very graphic descriptions of her own family in terms of how patriarchy was produced, promoted and protected by the familial figures of authority. So now we have some anecdotal evidence corroborating the functioning of patriarchy as described by Hooks. So she says quite clearly, when my older brother and I were born with a year separating us in age, patriarchy determined how we would each be regarded by our parents. So in the very moment of birth, you're born as a man, you're born as a woman, that determines the behavior, respect, that determines the behavior construct that you're born into. So the parents of these children, so one was a female child, one was a male child, they're born 1 year apart from each other. The parents were indoctrinated, the parents were consumers of patriarchy. Of course, they didn't realize they were consuming a construct, but they brought up the children differently in conformity to the norms of patriarchy. So the female child was brought up in a way which is distinctly different from the way the male child was brought up. And the entire politics of bringing up of parenting, the politics of parenting relied on certain patriarchal parameters, which included toys for children. So we'll see, we'll come by a point in the essay very quickly where Hooks is describing actually how toys become very discursive in quality. The toys that people play with, children play with, you think those are the most innocuous, innocent, non-discursive things. But she talks about how toys, appropriation of toys, your engagement with toys, the design of toys, these become profoundly patriarchal in quality, and that's sort of monitored through certain parameters of patriarchy. The toys that a male child is supposed to play with, the toys that a female child is supposed to play with are supposed to be mapped out and different in terms of design and also in terms of the function. So both our parents believed in patriarchy. They had been taught patriarchal thinking through religion. So religion, of course, becomes a very important institution in terms of protecting and promoting patriarchy. And we've seen historically how religion has always been an ally of the status quo, an ally of the hegemonic powers, hegemonic apparatus of control, whether the hegemonic apparatus was royalty, or fascism, or any kind of totalitarian control. We've always find that more often than not, religion was a very close ally to such structures of control. Such structures of surveillance. And religion, of course, it brings in some metaphysical meanings which help consolidate the ideological, the hegemonic ideological apparatus at that given point of time. So patriarchy, more often than not, finds this very big voice, very big ally in religion, which is, as we find in the case of most religions that we know, are profoundly patriarchal in quality, profoundly patriarchal in rhetoric, profoundly patriarchal in the vocabulary, in their function as well. So how so? And this is the evidence that Hooks is offering through her own example of being brought up in America in a family which believed in patriarchy, which believed in patriarchy promoted by religion. At church, they had learned that God created man to rule the world and everything in it, and that it was the work of women to help men perform those tasks, to obey and to always assume a subordinate role in relation to a powerful man. So the very inception of religious belief, the very indoctrination of religious belief was completely embedded with patriarchal parameters. So it was it was God who created the man, and God, of course, is male. And the woman was created as an afterthought to be a partner of the man, to help him perform his tasks, etc., to help him carry out his tasks. And it's the job of the woman who was created as an afterthought to obey, to conform to the desire, the wishes, the ambitions of the man. And it's always the man who is at the forefront, the man who is foregrounded in terms of importance, in terms of significance. So they were taught that God was male. So the voice of God was male, the pronoun used for God was male, the language of God was male, etc. These teachings were reinforced in every institution they encountered: schools, courthouses, clubs, sports arenas, as well as churches. Embracing patriarchal thinking like everyone else around them, they taught it to their children because it seemed like a natural way to organize life. So you can see the word natural over here is put inside quotes. And of course, there's a ring of irony operative over here. So the whole point of patriarchy, in order to become a grand narrative, like any grand narrative, it has to be naturalized. It has to be normativized. And this act of naturalization and the act of normativization is something which patriarchy constantly promotes and produces and protects. So like any grand narrative, patriarchy too operates through naturalization. You naturalize, you legitimize male superiority, you legitimize woman's inferiority, you naturalize the thought process which teaches you the woman are supposed to be conformist, women are supposed to be play the second fiddle, they are subservient to male desire, to male ambitions, to male will. So once you naturalize this kind of a discourse, then obviously you don't realize that this is a discourse in the first place. So you escape, you manage to efface the discursivity of patriarchy by naturalizing it. So I'll say it again, you manage to efface the discursivity of patriarchy by naturalizing it. So the process of naturalization is also aimed at effacing and making invisible the discursivity of patriarchy. You don't realize it's a discourse, you don't realize it's a constructed discourse, a constructed category which is discursive in quality, and you don't realize it because it's constantly naturalized through different forms, different imperatives, different structures, etc. As their daughter, I was taught that it was my role to serve, to be weak, to be free from a burden of thinking, to caretake and nurture others. So, if you look at the verbs over here, to serve, to be weak, to be free from the burden of thinking. So thinking was a burden which was best left untouched by women. So women should not be thinking, women should not be thoughtful, a woman should just carry out the functions expected of them, women should just carry out the functions ordered to them, right? And so that is very much a part of our crude patriarchal discourse which is operative over here. It doesn't even want to conceal its crudeness in a way, but the point is you don't realize it's crude because it's so naturalized. It's something which is constantly naturalized and normativized. It's made into a norm, it's made into a natural thing. So it's just something that you do, it's something you're supposed to do unquestionably. Okay, so it was my role to serve, to be weak, to be free from the burden of thinking, to caretake and nurture others. So the nurturing quality is something which is taught to women, something which is celebrated in women. So if you're a woman, a female child, you're supposed to be a nurturer, a caregiver, a caretaker. Whereas the man, the male child, is supposed to go out and rule the world, with great ambitions, with great political public ambitions. So you can see there's also a spatial quality about patriarchy. So women are supposed to stay indoors, women are supposed to be inside the house, protecting the house, taking care of the house, whereas the men should step out and do things in the real world outside. So it's very clearly mapped in a spatial way. My brother was taught that it was his role to be served, to provide and to be strong, to think, strategize and plan, and to refuse to caretake or nurture others. So it's a complete binary, as you can see. So the brother was taught just the opposite thing. So it is his job to be served. So he would expect to be served, he would expect to be waited upon, and the woman should serve him, the woman should take care of him, whereas he should be strong. So it's his job to be strong, to strategize, to make plans, etc., and to refuse to caretake or nurture others. So the nurturing ability, the nurturing quality is given to women alone, whereas the men are supposed to be strong rulers, strong strategists who do the things outside the home. So the woman takes care of the home by nurturing, the man takes care of the world outside by strategizing. So you can see again a very neat spatial division, a spatial mapping at work. I was taught that it was not proper for a female to be violent. It was unnatural. So again, look at the constructed quality of naturalness and unnaturalness over here. But however, the whole point is to conceal the constructed quality, to make it look as natural as possible. So the moment you deviate from that kind of a quality, you are very quickly classified as unnatural, as something that is not legitimized, something that is not sanctioned, right? So if you're a woman who's not a caregiving woman, not a nurturing woman, then you are unnatural woman. If you're a woman who strategizes, who wants to go out in the world and do real things, then obviously you're being unnatural as a woman. So again, there's a very neat functional mapping, spatial mapping, ontological mapping at work over here. My brother was taught that his value would be determined by his will to do violence, albeit in appropriate settings. He was taught that for a boy, enjoying violence was a good thing, albeit in appropriate settings. So again, you can see there's a refrain quality over here, albeit in appropriate settings, albeit in appropriate settings. So setting obviously is the space. So again, the spatial quality of patriarchy is very, very important. It is very spatial in quality. It is located, it's determined by the space you're inhabiting at any given point of time. So it is it's a great virtue for a boy to be violent, to be able to articulate violence, violent vocabulary, violent language, violent behavior in certain spaces. And if you're able, if you have the ability to acquire that skill to be violent, that skill to perform violence linguistically in an embodied way, etc., then obviously you acquire agency in certain settings. So agency becomes a very important factor in this essay, and throughout the course you find that's one of the terms which we will keep revisiting in terms of looking at the relationship between agency and identity, especially gendered identity, and how the two are sort of organically and ontologically related to each other. But here we have an instance where a male child, from the very inception, is taught certain things, is indoctrinated into certain things, and those certain things include a teaching that, you know, that it's okay, it's a good thing, it's a prestigious thing for a man to be violent in certain appropriate settings, not at home, not against your parents, that would be disobedience, that would be looked down upon, but in a real world outside where other men, other boys of your age are trying to bully you, it is a job to stand up and be violent, because then you'll be considered to be someone who is agentic in quality. So for a boy, enjoying violence was a good thing. So again, we're looking at how even ludic performances, playful, ludic is playful, playful performances become discursive in quality. So we have boys who enjoy violence as forms of entertainment, whereas girls are supposed to enjoy entertainment, forms of entertainment which are nurturing in quality. So girls are supposed to play with dolls and little kitchenware, whereas boys are given guns and different kinds of other gadgets in order to train them into violence, in order to make it some kind of a proxy activity for the violence in a real world. So that's something which is clearly mapped out through this essay. What else? He was taught that a boy should not express feelings. I was taught that girls could and should express feelings, or at least some of them. So, and again, even at the level of emotions, even at the level of feelings, we have a very clear binary, a very clear mapping out in operations. The boys are taught not to express feelings. So again, we have this very old stereotype, or the strong silent type. So the boys, again, the equation is between strength and silence, right? So if you are silent in the face of adversity, if you handle adversity silently, stoically, without expressing emotions, then you're obviously categorized as a strong male. So the equation between strength and silence is very handy and very, very, very convenient, very conventional, and consistently articulated in different historical times. Whereas for a woman, she's encouraged to express her feelings. I mean, if you don't express your feelings as a woman, then obviously you're an unfeeling woman, and that again very quickly becomes unnatural, right? So we can see how natural, the quality of being natural, is discursively determined. However, this discursive quality is naturalized to different kinds of articulations, to different iterations, different practices, different rituals, etc. When I responded with rage at being denied a when I responded with rage at being denied a toy, I was taught that as a girl in a patriarchal household, that rage was not an appropriate feminine feeling. That it should not be expressed, but be eradicated. So rage becomes a male feeling. It becomes a prerogative of the male. So you can see how even emotions which you think are non-discursive in quality, emotions which you think are purely organic, purely visceral, purely embodied in quality, are actually discursively determined. So again, we're looking at the relationship between the inside and the outside. This is something which I will keep telling throughout this course, that a large part of looking at gender, looking at representations of gender, is to look at the loop between the inside and the outside. What is inside you as a human being? Yourself, your neural self, your thinking self, your visceral self, and how that viscerality, how that behavior, neural behavior, is actually determined by the external apparatus around you, by the external environment around you. And again, we're looking at a loop between the inside and the outside, which is constant and consistent. So rage, which is a very visceral feeling, a very visceral emotion, a very visceral articulation is also discursively determined, in the sense that boys are taught that rage is a good thing, that it's a good thing to be angry as a boy, as a male. However, the converse happens with women. So when a female child expresses her rage at being denied a toy, then she is very quickly taught that rage should be eradicated. Not only should it not be expressed, but it should be eradicated, done away with completely. So it's inappropriate for a girl to express rage, to be angry, because anger is a prerogative of the male and not for women. When my brother responded with rage at being denied a toy, he was taught that as a boy in a patriarchal household, that his ability to express rage was good, but that he had to learn the best setting to unleash his hostility. So again, setting becomes important, the space becomes important. So to unleash your rage, you need to have the appropriate setting, the appropriate space. So again, we're looking at the relationship between performativity and spatiality. So certain performances which are embodied, certain performances which are strategic in quality, they iterate something, they express something. It depends on the space in which the performances take place. So again, we even look at the language I just used, the sentence I just used, taking place, right? These events are taking place. So again, we're looking at a relationship between the event, the functioning of the event, the ontology of the event, and the space which accommodates the event, right? So these emotions take place somewhere, should take place in certain settings. So settings become a very important category in gender, especially in relation to identity and agency. So you find more often than not, when it comes to male expressions, when it comes to male agency, the public space becomes very important as a setting. Whereas when it comes to woman's agency, a woman's identity, more often than not, we find the representations in very crude, regressive discourses is the interior. The interior of the house, interior of a room, the inside, not the public space, but the private space. That's the space inhabited by the woman, the kitchen, the bedroom, the drawing room, etc. So the home, the interiors of the home, that is where the woman is sort of located in a very, very regressive patriarchal rhetoric, a very regressive patriarchal discourse. And sometimes it doesn't have to be very regressive. It can appear to be liberal, it can appear to be quite progressive, but you find those structures are replicated in more sophisticated ways, in more concealed ways, in more covert ways. Okay. So it was not good for him to use his rage to oppose the wishes of his parents, but later, when he grew up, he was taught that rage was permitted, and allowing rage to provoke him to violence would help him protect home and nation. So again, if we look at the two categories in the end, home and nation, these become the units for protection, the units which produce these kind of behavior, the units which encourage this kind of behavior, the units which require these kind of behaviors. So the home and nation are both units which need to be protected, promoted, and produced over and over again. So both are different forms of grand narratives. So the home becomes a grand narrative which has a set of values, a set of prestige, a set of qualities which must be conformed to in a hegemonic discourse. And likewise for the nation too, it requires certain qualities which must be conformed to. So home and nation become very important categories which are to be protected. So as you can see, there's a relative quality about violence over here. It's very, very relativized. So for a woman to be violent, it is absolutely discouraged. It's something which is looked down upon, something which is told to the woman not to do in terms of talking her out of it and teaching her not to behave in that way. It must be eradicated, it must not be expressed, but also eradicated completely, done away with completely. Whereas with a man, he's encouraged to be angry, he's encouraged to express rage in certain settings, in certain situations. And what is taught to him from a very early age is that if you're angry, if you unleash your hostility in appropriate settings, not against the parents, not against the people who matter to you inside your home, but if you unleash your hostility in a public space, in a suitably public space, then you are on your way to protecting and promoting your home and your nation. So this is very much part of our masculinist rhetoric of protection, the masculinist virtue of protection. You make a virtue for protecting, and of course when you say you're protecting your home and nation, you find that more often than not the people to be protected become the females. So you essentially, as a male, it is your holy mission, your divine duty, and these metaphysical qualities, these virtue qualities are very quickly invested into these performances. It becomes your metaphysical duty, your divine duty to protect your home, which is feminized in quality. You protect your nation, which also is feminized in quality more often than not. So the nation becomes the mother, which needs protection from the sun, the muscular, strong sun. And likewise, the home also becomes the female space, which needs to be protected against any kind of external attack. And so it's the job of the male, the grown, able male, to be able to protect these two categories, which are conveniently gendered, conveniently feminized in quality. Okay, so and then there are more anecdotal evidence which Hooks is offering over here in order to corroborate what she's saying. And this is something that she says about her childhood, about her growing up years. We lived in a farm country, isolated from other people. Our sense of gender roles was learned from our parents, from the ways we saw them behave. My brother and I remember our confusion about gender. In reality, I was stronger and more violent than my brother, which we learned quickly was bad. So for a female child to be more violent, to be stronger than a male child, was a very undesirable thing, because that's something which is not part of the hegemonic narrative. So the female child should be meek, should be submissive, should be delicate, whereas the male child is encouraged to be strong, to be muscular, to be playful, to be more assertive, etc. Because, you know, the male child is supposed to be closer to acquiring agency. And agency can be acquired only through strength, only through articulations, only through assertions. Whereas for a female child to be violent and to be assertive is something which is a problematic thing in a very patriarchal household, in a very patriarchal discourse such as this. And he was gentle, peaceful. He was a gentle, peaceful boy, which we learned was really bad. So for a boy to be gentle and peaceful in that kind of a setting was really undesirable. It's something which was really dangerous in many ways, because a boy should be very quickly able to articulate violence, articulate agency through very violent language, through very assertive discourses, assertive vocabulary. Although we were often confused, we knew one fact for certain, that we could not be and act the way we wanted to, doing what we felt like. It was clear to us that our behavior had to follow a predetermined gendered script. We both learned the word patriarchy in our adult life, when we learned that a script that had determined what we should be, the identities we should make, was based on patriarchal values and beliefs about gender. So the word script is very important over here. So what she's saying essentially is that we are born into a system which already has a script for us. So we become actors in the script. We become passive agents performing and enacting and containing that particular script. So the word script is important because it connotes a written quality. There's a written quality about script. It is written somewhere. And that, you know, is constantly being written and rewritten and consolidated and revised, etc. But then, you know, we are supposed to, as male and female children, Hooks says quite clearly where we are supposed to follow the particular script, to follow the particular pattern of behavior. And then she says quite clearly that it was very, you know, obvious to us at a very early age that we could not act and be the way we really wanted to be. So what we're seeing over here is an eradication of true agency. The real agency, what you really, in terms of what you really want to do as a human self, that has been done away with, that has been completely eradicated, dismissed summarily. What we have instead is a compulsion to conform to certain scripted kinds of behaviors, scripted kinds of knowledge systems, knowledge networks. So we had to follow a certain predetermined gendered script, and the script is very, very gendered in quality. So there's a certain script for a male child, another script for a female child, and they are very, very different from each other. We both learned the word patriarchy in our adult life. So only after we became adults, only after we became, it was much later in life that you actually learn the word patriarchy. But, you know, looking back at what we were learning at a very young age, we now realize, Hooks says quite clearly, we now realize that what we are imbibing and conforming and consuming were patriarchal codes of conduct, which were taught to us at a very early age and was meant to indoctrinate us to those kinds of parameters. So I was more interested in challenging patriarchy than my brother, because it was a system that was always leaving me out of things that I wanted to be part of. So, she very quickly figured out that this was a system meant to facilitate the brother, facilitate the male child. And it was denying her certain things, denying her certain privileges, certain access to certain kinds of activities which she liked, which she coveted. So, again, we're seeing a denial of access. Access becomes a very important factor in gender. So you don't have access to certain privileges simply because you happen to be a female, simply because you happen to be of a certain gender. Those access, those access points are very, very heteronormative in quality, as we'll see very quickly as we move on in this course. And access comes with privilege, access comes with agency, access is equated with agency. You can only acquire agency through your access to certain privileges. So she very quickly figures out that she's denied certain privileges, she's denied certain access to privileges simply because she happens to be a female. And that's something that she is rebelling against. She is resentful because she figures out that because I happen to be a woman, I don't have certain things, certain toys, certain activities which are very easily and unquestionably given to my brother simply because he happens to be a male child. So obviously she was more rebellious, she was more subversive, she was more of a problem to patriarchy than her brother, because for the brother he was getting all the privileges unquestionably, so he really wouldn't have to revolt or speak out or articulate his resentment or his confusion, because more often than not that stands them in very good stead in terms of privilege. In our family life of the 50s, marbles were a boy's game, and now we have an interesting metaphor. Again, something which is very quickly becoming a metaphor. Marbles. And she says, the description which follows from here, tells us in a very detailed way that marbles were certain activities, certain ludic activities, L-U-D-I-C, ludic, playful activities, which were, exclusively meant for men, exclusively meant for male children and not for women. But she says so clearly that not only did she like playing marbles, she was very good at it. She was better at playing marbles than her brother. But then, of course, the whole point became very problematic, and she was denied the marbles. And then we have a very graphic description of the phallogocentric father, the authoritative father, coming at home, and beating her physically, corporally, abusing her. So it almost becomes an example of child abuse in a very disturbing kind of a way, where the father figure comes and asserts his authority, his control over the female child by beating her physically and then by confining her to a room. And that becomes a very graphic description, a very unsettling description for us readers. So my brother had inherited his marbles from men in the family. So it's almost like a legacy, a masculine legacy, a male legacy handed down through generations. So the brother had inherited the marbles from his father, who in turn may have inherited that from his father, and it just went on like that forever. So from the men in the family, so it's part of a masculinist legacy that he has inherited. He had a tin box to keep them in, all sizes and shapes, marvelously colored. They were, to my eye, the most beautiful objects. So, the marbles became the most beautiful objects to, the female child who desired to play with those marbles. We played together with them, often with me aggressively clinging to the marble I liked best. So, she oftentimes found herself clinging to a marble that she liked best, had a sense of possession about the marbles, refusing to share. When Dad was at work, our stay-at-home mom was quite content to see us playing marbles together. So the mother didn't really bother so much because Dad was at work and the mother stayed at home. Yeah, Dad, looking at a play from a patriarchal perspective, was disturbed by what he saw. His daughter, aggressive and competitive, was a better player than his son, and that's something which was immediately problematic, because to be a better player in a male game for a woman was actually quite problematic in many ways, because that showed, that disturbed the gender narrative, that disturbed the patriarchal script, which was supposed to be conformed to very closely, and second, it unsettled entire gender forms of behavior which was expected, which was produced in that particular patriarchal household. His daughter, aggressive and competitive. Again, these two adjectives are very important because these are very male adjectives, and men are supposed to be aggressive and competitive in terms of acquiring agency in a real world, in a public space, whereas women are not supposed to be aggressive or competitive because they're supposed to be nurturers. They're not supposed to be winners. They're not supposed to be players. They're supposed to be caregivers, to be subservient to men. his son was passive. The boy did not really seem to care who won and was willing to give over marbles on demand. So the boy was exhibiting unmanly behavior. The boy was exhibiting non-competitive behavior, non-patriarchal behavior, and that was a very bad sign for the patriarchal father figure, the father observing. So you can see the whole thing, the whole scene becomes quite symbolic in quality. We have the phallocentric authority figure observing an act of play, an act of game, and a game is going on, a play is going on. And that play, that ludic activity, that playful activity, in a very micro way, in a very micro space, is actually subverting the gender categories. It's subverting the gender stereotype, the stereotypes of gender. And that becomes a problem for the observing male figure, the observing male authority, who very quickly wishes to redress it, very quickly wishes to put it back together in a way that is satisfactory from a patriarchal perspective. Dad decided that this play had to end, that both my brother and I needed to learn a lesson about appropriate gender roles. So we find the word decided over here has a sense of irony as well as finality about it. It was a decision taken by the father figure. And again, the whole scene can be read very symbolically, as I keep saying. And this is one of the beauties of a very good literary essay. It's a literary essay as well as an anecdotal essay where things can become very symbolic very quickly. They can very quickly slip into symbols, symbolic significance, symbolic semantic significance, and then come back to the literal level as well. So this play between the literal level and the symbolic level is something which makes this essay quite complex in quality. And we have a scene, the beginning of a scene which is very symbolic in quality, where the father figure decides, and of course the word decided over here is quite loaded, because what is obvious, what is apparent is that there's no, it's completely undemocratic in quality. The father figure has decided to act in a certain way, and that's the end of it. And then the decision is followed by the act, an act which is obviously a very gruesome abuse, corporeal abuse on the female. The recalcitrant, the subversive female child is then abused, punished for being a subversive, and then the whole aim was to put her back in her place. So she's beaten physically, she's beaten at the bodily level, and then she's confined to a small room in order to be taught a lesson, in order to be put back on the track, the patriarchal track. And that's a very disturbing, unsettling, and depressing scene, which is described in graphic details over here. So Dad decided that I needed to learn a lesson about appropriate gender roles. So I stop at this point because this requires a lot of unpacking the scene which follows over here. But suffice it to say that what is happening, what is about to happen over here, is that the father figure, Dad, as you can see, the word Dad is written with a capital D. So as opposed to the word mom, which is written in small m. So even when Dad appears in the middle of a sentence, it's written in a capital D. And obviously the idea is to make it symbolic. The idea is to make it some kind of an authority figure. So Dad is a symbolic father figure, the patriarchal figure, the patriarch, which will go to any extent, which will take any measures in order to preserve and protect the patriarchal parameters in the household. And this game of marbles, this very simply, apparently seemingly innocuous game of marbles, very quickly becomes discursive in quality, very quickly becomes subversive in quality, political in quality, and then the whole idea from the Dad's perspective is to put back the status quo, put back the hierarchy, the desired, the hegemonic hierarchy, which is required by patriarchy in the household. So I stop at this point, and then I move on to a section where the entire act happens, entire abuse happens, abuse which is designed, abuse which is meant to teach the female child a lesson, abuse which is meant to recalibrate the hierarchy of patriarchy in the household, the very patriarchal household. So which is a section which we'll take up in the next lecture. So I stop at this point, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you for your attention.